whether people resist with violence or whether people resist non-violently, the state almost always responds with violence. So that is not ever going to be in question. And so the question really is then, what form of resistance is one that forces the power to listen? And I say that you need a diversity of forms of resistance. Not one form is going to be the form. I think there have been some kind of revolutions already which are not very nice ones. For example, I think there is neoliberalism in a way has been a revolution. And in India, I say that the most successful secessionist struggle in India has been the secession of the middle and upper classes into outer space, where they formed a country of their own with the other elites. And from that place, they look down and they say, what is our water doing in your rivers? What is our wood doing in your forest? What is our oil doing in your country? And so we can't even look at things anymore in terms of India, America, Spain, England, because there is this elite which has all the weapons, all the power, all the information, all the data collection, all the surveillance. And that is a kind of revolution from the top, we don't realize how controlled we are. It's not as though I decided that I must have a lot of topics in this book, or I must tell the history of India in this book, or I must write about gender and caste and conflict and Kashmir. It's not like that, but what I thought was I must write a book about the air, and all this is in the air,
Yes, love
and
too.
we are actually. I think, when people say to me, you're a writer and then you're an activist, because today writers, novelists, it's a bit like you become some kind of NGO where you have to have a subject. Are you writing a novel about love, or are you writing a novel about Kashmir? No, a novel is about everything, and everything is not a topic, that's why I always argue with this word activist. When people say activist, in the old days, writers used to write political things, and we used to be writers. But now the definition of the writer is like some kind of small entertainer. But I thought, novels themselves, where in the world, or when in the world did that happen, when it became a suspicious activity to write politically inside a novel? But sometime it happened, And I wanted to write a book that was not scared about writing about everything, And to look at a novel like you might look at a city, like a city that you plan, and then that the plans break down because there are encroachments and immigrations and blind alleys, and then you plan it again. And it has a sort of a democracy to it, because, again, I didn't want to write a book about a few characters and a backdrop that may be political, but I wanted to write a story that was like a city where you didn't have a crowd. People had names, had stories. So for me, it's a universe which is very, very particular. And the other thing is that almost nobody, certainly not any of the writers that you know of from India, will ever write about the caste system. And the caste system is the engine that runs modern India. It is a system where some human beings are, of society is arranged in a hierarchy, and some human beings are thought of as untouchables. Their job is to clean the sewers and clean the shit. And for intellectuals on the left, for writers to have deliberately avoided writing about this is like writing about apartheid South Africa and forgetting to mention that there was apartheid. But caste is the engine that runs ancient India, modern India, medieval India, and I think for a long time the future India. And unless you understand it, you understand very little of that place. And I thought that in itself, fame in itself, money in itself, walking away from it is also a revolutionary act. When you say, look, it's not what I write for. And for me, it was very difficult living in that country, looking at the levels of oppression and poverty and the fact that you're a famous writer in a country where most people can't even read or eat or send their children to school. It was very disturbing. And I decided that I would walk on the riverbed instead of swimming on the top of the river, And so I didn't want to just become a novel producing machine, every 2 years you produce mechanically. I mean, I'm not saying some writers write beautiful books, and many of them, but for me, my books are intricate. They are different from, if my political essays are an argument, the novel is a universe, which you invite a reader, like you invite a loved one to walk through it. They take time. I'm not able to write books like this on demand. Well, India is a country that lives in several centuries simultaneously, So there's no, whenever people ask me about a woman in India, I'll say, which woman, because India is a country where girl babies are, there's female infanticide, there's female feticide, there's situations where mothers are giving their daughters less food than they give their sons, there's dowry deaths and so on. And then you also have the freest, fiercest, most brilliant women who live there. But on the other hand, the question you ask about women is a very complicated one, because I'll just digress a little bit, that India in the 1970s was a very revolutionary society, All that has been destroyed today, and the resistance movements are not asking for justice. They're asking, please don't let our land be taken over by the corporates. So we've all been pushed to the wall. But what I want to say about women obviously the hardest hit in all this privatization, globalization, dispossession. But the feminist movement in India has been hugely NGOized, So you have the situation where there are certain things that are considered feminist, and they are important things. You're working on, you can be talking about sex work or gender work or malnutrition or things like that. But if you ever question the overarching economic policy, that's not considered feminist. One of the characters who's called Musa in the book, who's a Kashmiri man who eventually becomes a militant, is forced to become a militant, forced to go underground. And he, in a letter that he writes to his little daughter, whose funeral he's just attended, where hundreds of thousands of people are chanting Azadi, Azadi means freedom. And he writes to his little girl, trying to describe her own funeral to her. And he says, you always wanted me to tell you real stories. And she used to be very fed up with these little baby fairy tales. But he says, I don't know what's real anymore, because in Kashmir, the living are, the dead are alive, and the living are just dead people pretending. So in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, there are many kinds of borders, national borders, borders of gender, borders of caste, borders of religion, but also the borders between the living and the dead, which are quite porous, and sometimes they mingle with each other like guests at a cocktail party. It is a great irony, actually, to me, that I wonder about this a lot, that in Kashmir, which is occupied by the Indian Army, it's a relatively well-off place compared to the rest of India. So in a strange way, you see that the poorest people in Kashmir are actually Indians. Poor labor from Bihar who are working in the fields, who are living in the slums. The Kashmiris are really much better off. But they have, and because they are people with the middle class, they keep track of their dead, and so that there are this many people who have disappeared, who have been forcibly disappeared, probably killed by the army. And yet, there's another kind of horror in India, the violence of poverty, the violence of caste. So actually there's a letter when I'm describing the city where you talk just about the number of unidentified dead bodies that shows up on the streets of Delhi. If you look at the number of children that go missing in Delhi, children that are disappeared, children that are found, it isn't because of war. It's because of the violence of poverty and the violence of a society that has. All societies are unjust, yes, but here is a society that has institutionalized injustice in the form of caste and has given it religious sanction, So it's possible for people not to see the violence that is all around them. It's almost as if they have some kind of filter, Mm-hmm. Well, I just don't understand how people act surprised when you tell them that capitalism is the creator of great inequality. And they're like, really? I said, yeah. So unless we understand that there has to be a mechanism where you can't just expect that. For instance, in India, everybody tells me, why don't you talk about the great things? Of course, the book has a lot of beautiful things about love and poetry. What they mean is, why don't you talk about the great new middle class that neoliberalism has created? And it has created a great middle class. It has lifted a lot of people out of poverty. But what they don't understand is that has come at the cost of many more people being pushed into poverty. The crisis of capitalism is upon us. It's upon us. And unless we address that, there is no point in thinking that there can be no climate change, but we can carry on with our lives as normal. There can be like 75% of the world can be pushed into slavery, but everything will be okay. It's not going to happen. There's a psychosis that is there which needs to be addressed. If you look at many conflicts in Africa, if you look at many conflicts in India, what happens, and I think this is a very important thing to understand for us, that sometimes there's a conflict and it seems that it's this tribe against that tribe, or this place against that place, or this caste against that caste, and it's happening a lot in India now. But actually it's because resources are shrinking, the water table is diving down, and the only way you can claim a resource is to form an identity and then lay a claim to it. So often the conflict isn't really about what it appears to be about, And I think the two projects of annihilation that human intelligence has come up with, which has human intelligence has stripped our instinct for survival. It has disconnected our minds, which connect water to rivers and hens to eggs and so on, and the two projects of annihilation that our great species has come up with are nuclear war and climate change, one very fast and one increasing in speed. But yeah.